Hello, my name is Alex Borucki and I'm the director of the UCI Latin American Studies Center. Here we are for the first of a series of Cortos Latinoamericanos or Latin American clips with Kat Cosby, who is now in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I'm really excited to introduce you to Kat Cosby, who is a doctoral candidate in the UCI History PhD program. Kat is completing their dissertation now with the support of a Mellon ACLS Dissertation Fellowship, indeed. So, hi, Kat.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, this is great. You have been in Brazil, broadly speaking, for 2 years or almost 2 years, in and out. I want to ask you, how has been your experience there in Sao Paulo, but you have been in other places before as well, in relationship to the outbreak of COVID-19?
Yeah, so I arrived here actually a couple of weeks before the 2018 Brasa conference in Rio, with Gladys Mitchell-Walthour as the president of Brasa. And it was actually at the Federal University, which is the university that Marielle Franco attended. And I met a whole host of wonderful scholars. I had the opportunity to hear research, ongoing research of scholars throughout Brazil and in the United States. And one of the things that we were talking about quite frequently was about the political situation in Brazil and how uncertain people were of what was gonna transpire as there was the coming election, which Bolsonaro won. And I think there was a lot of, from particularly scholars in the United States, a lot of fear, anxiety around what Bolsonaro Brazil might look like. And so I don't want to say the unexpected, but at a certain point, it kind of became obvious that was what was going to transpire, and it did. And I think that environment in and of itself was quite tense. The protest immediately after his election, before the election, it was a really kind of tense place to be. I think some people were terrified, some people were hopeful because of the exit of the PT. And I think from there, you kind of started to see Bolsonaro make some changes within Brazilian society, one of the biggest being to retirement. And now people have to work longer. So there have been various cuts to like social welfare programs in the Bolsonaro government. And that's happened well before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. I think that you've seen kind of like what's happening in LA, where you see this increase of folks living in tent cities and living on the streets. That's also been the case here in Sao Paulo before March, which is when I went into quarantine. In my neighborhood in particular, you would see children, really young people, a lot of actually queer people, particularly in Se, which is a plaza not too far from where I live. There are a lot of trans women that live there, and would ask for money. And I think those numbers started to kind of grow before the pandemic. I remember being at Carnival and we were hearing about what was happening in other parts of the world, and everybody's like, do you think it's gonna happen here? And there was news that week that someone from Italy was in Sao Paulo and had COVID and had tested. And so everybody was sort of like, whoa, what's happening? Like I don't know what that would look like here. And I think that's kind of the first moment that it hit that COVID was coming to Brazil. And I think people then started to think about what that was going to mean. And so I think that the federal government, I would say basically a week is what I noticed of like things stopping. So where I live, when I look out my window for a week, I could see mountains because the number of cars and pollution went down drastically. And I had no idea that those mountains were even there. And I've been living in the same apartment for about 2 years. But I kind of think beyond that, the governor and the mayor of Sao Paulo did I guess they did a bit to close a few things down, but really it was only like a week that I noticed any sort of like rupture in noise, pollution, etc. And really since then, things have just kind of been normal, not necessarily for me because I'm quarantined and I have the luxury and privilege of working at home, but my neighbor is in and out all the time for her job, has been going in person this entire time. That hasn't changed. And so I think for a lot of people, even though the pandemic is ongoing, and I think Brazil is nearing 100,000 deaths, that hasn't necessarily changed things for many people. And the federal government basically has had no response to the pandemic here, and for the Brazilian people. And I think that what was happening prior to the pandemic really kind of starting in March, noticeably in March, that these kind of divisions have been exacerbated and the social welfare programs or lack thereof of the Bolsonaro government. They're just glaring holes in society, I think at this point. And I think that's kind of the situation from my point of view. And this is me being in quarantine and reading the news quite a bit. So it's impacted my life, my ability to move around and be in the city that I happen to be writing about.
Yeah, and tell us about the writing as well. Could you tell us about your current project, which is the reason for which you have been in Brazil?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am doing my dissertation on Black women's geographies in Sao Paulo from really 1871 to 1930. I was on a Fulbright for a year to do my research, which was wonderful to have that kind of time and support. And I looked at probably 50,000 incident reports that are in the Arquivo Público do Estado de São Paulo, the public archive here in Sao Paulo. And they are medical records of, it could be someone being hit by a car, sickness, anything of medical nature that might have happened in this city. And the documents that I have are from 1912 to 1930. Anything that happened in this period, these records are actually held in the archive. And it's one of the few places that I could find Black people and Black women in particular, because many of the documents in the early 20th century don't have race. It's something that's completely omitted after slavery, which makes it really difficult to do historiographical work on this period. So I started with those, and I just spent the year really kind of collecting them, and at the same time getting to know the city, because I wanted to use, within these documents, there are 4 times where these documents mention addresses. So you have the address where the person lived, where the incident occurred, where the person was found, and where the person was sent. So I felt that it was a really rich source to kind of explore geography, which is not necessarily what I set out to do when I started as a doctoral student. I'm now going my 6th year, so it's been quite a journey to get to this point. But I decided that there's a lot of work that's being done, particularly by Black feminist scholars, but by Black scholars, period, within geography. And it seemed like a really, rich source to do my work. So at the same time that I was going to the archive, I was doing work with, there's an institute, Bexiga, and there are some professors that run this institute, and they do tours around the city of Black geographies. There's also the Volta Negra. They're not affiliated with any institution. They're just young Black people who really want to know the history of Sao Paulo. And so they give tours and talk about what happened where. And as I was reading these documents, I was going to some of these spaces. So I was able to kind of connect what I was seeing in the archive with where I lived. And a lot of the records actually that I'm finding now, people are from this place called Cambuci, which is where I live. So there are some streets, it's like Espírita is right next to my house. I found at least, 15, 20 women who lived on this street. So it's been wonderful to be in the place that you study and to really get to know the geography, because these women were here, these women lived here. And I think that it's helped me really connect to my work. So, and I'm in the process of writing now. So hopefully I will have drafts done soon. And then, you know, who knows what will come next, given the place that I am and the time that we're in. But it's been an exciting 2 years for me. And I think just seeing kind of what's happening with COVID, I mean, I'm looking at medical records, right? What's happening with COVID and what's happening in the documents that I'm working with. There's so many parallels that it has, it's illuminated a lot of things about the period that I study. There's a little too much parallel. I'm reading things in the 1930s or 1920s that are happening now. And that's been a bit depressing, I would say, that we are kind of in a similar cycle, and also kind of gives me hope that there are ways to avoid repeating these kinds of situations in the future. So yeah, that's it.
Great. Thank you very much. Obrigado.
De nada.
This has been all, guys, and we will see you next time in these cortos. Bye-bye.
Thank you.